Well, last week we were after hours and it was dark and we were having a beer. We've gone to the opposite extreme now, and it's dead early in the morning.
It's too early.
Come in and beat everybody.
I feel like I'm on a drive time radio show.
How many coffees have you had so far?
It's my second coffee.
Oh, you're going to need more than that.
The green tea, first off.
That's not going to wake you up.
Well, I'm trying to stop drinking coffee for the first 2 hours before I wake up.
Oh, I've heard that advice, yeah.
So
you just get up earlier.
Impacts your cortisol, which apparently does something bad to you. So
Google that, listeners.
Google that, there you go.
Yeah.
But yes, it does.
So an early morning one. This will be an interesting experience. See how this works.
And we had our first piece of fan mail this week as well, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Yes, our fan mail bag. Our loyal listener.
Our loyal listener. Yes.
Who's listening in.
Shout out to the caravan man.
Yes. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much for the feedback. And we know there are a few other regular listeners as well that give us some feedback, all positive, and we're glad you're enjoying the podcasts. So, talking of which, shall we do another one?
Yes.
Here we go. So, hello, you're listening to the SME Growth Podcast. I'm David Parry from Wellmeadow, and with me as ever is the indomitable Richard Buckle.
Good morning. I will apologise for my voice first off.
I think it's quite gravelly.
It is quite gravelly today.
Yeah.
I feel like I should be in a jazz band or something.
Normally I've got the low voice, you've got it this week.
So yeah.
So you're providing bass end cover for our little duet. So thanks for joining us. Here we go again. And this week's subject, we've been meaning to do this for a number of weeks actually, haven't we? And we've had other subjects crop up and take its place in the queue. But this week we're doing vision. What is a vision? How do you get one? Is it important? All that sort of stuff. And it's often talked about in businesses in very general terms. But I think if you were to ask 10 directors what a vision is, you'd end up with 11 answers. It's not, there's no common understanding of it, is there? So we're going to cover a bit of that, talk about what it is. And we do quite a bit of work with clients, don't we? Helping them to come up with
I
this.
think it's often kind of misconstrued, a vision, maybe seen as a bit of fluff that people don't really need. It's that kind of fluffy bit where everyone sits in a room and does things with post-it notes and stuff like that. But I think
often in a hotel somewhere with an evening stay over, people remember more the meal and the drinks afterwards than the post-it notes.
By the experience. But I think our view would be that a vision is absolutely critical to any business, really, isn't it? Regardless of its size.
You got to know where you're going. Well, question: do you need to know where you're going? We would argue you do. If you don't, what are you doing? Drifting?
You're drifting, and I suppose you may get lucky and you may rise with the tide or something. But if you wish to, I suppose, put your business ambitions into the hands of fate, as it were.
Well, I suppose it comes down to whether you think you're driving the business or whether it's driving you. And we know businesses that have been lucky. Great. They've never thought about doing a vision, probably laugh at the idea of it, actually. And they're still successful. So it's not as if there's a one-to-one relationship here. Those businesses with a clear vision are successful. All sorts of other ways of being successful, largely down to luck maybe, but it certainly increases your chances.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about vision, should we try and just define what we mean?
Well, let's go through the various different words that I hear banded around, and you tell me how you see these, and I see how I heard some horror stories from clients and that sort of thing. But vision, mission, strategy, they're probably the three ones that get bundled together, and you get values in there as well. But they're probably the three main ones, aren't they? So what's the difference between, what's the use of each of those terms, vision, mission, and strategy? So how do you think of a vision?
So a vision is, in its most basic form, where are we going?
Yeah.
It's a destination, it's a future state, as it were.
Yeah, and it's got to be somewhere more than just round the corner in terms of, navigational metaphors. It's more your North Star, isn't it? Yeah. It's somewhere a long way away that actually doesn't shift. Even if you move around it, the North Star's still in the same place.
And then the mission is kind of more, what is it that we do?
What do we do? That's a bit mixed up with purpose as well, which we hear a bit about.
Purpose is maybe a bit more, why are we doing it?
Yeah. But you hear people talking about a mission statement, and then they say something that's a bit more vision-y. And I'm not sure if this is an interpretation of how some American firms treat it, or just how big firms do their stuff. But for me, mission is still very good, but it's less important for me than vision and strategy. You've got to know what you're doing. What's your business model? And often
I don't know whether it's stretching it a little bit, but maybe the mission to me seems a little bit more like, if you go on a mission, it's almost a bit more short term. Like that's what we're doing. Whereas a vision is much more, we're looking at the horizon, we're looking...
Lifelong, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So where's strategy fit into all of that then?
Well, strategy is, how do we get there?
Yeah. So that pair of where we're going, how do we get there for vision and strategy does it for me. Whenever I'm trying to explain to a group, and if they all come in with different understandings, just getting everybody on the same page is useful to start with, isn't it? Just if we're going to talk about these words, let's all adopt the same meaning.
They need to be defined. Otherwise, and I think where you see that lack of definition is where it's very hard to align people. And I think that's another kind of purpose of a vision is to, probably shouldn't say purpose of a vision, should I really confusing the terms, but a vision is something that enables an organisation to align people. So you've got to have that clarity over your terms. Otherwise, even if it's just within your organisation.
Yeah. And if it's well understood and well used, it will crop up, and we'll cover this later on, it'll crop up in lots of different places, in terms of how you make business decisions. And you can almost imagine if you've got this done well, then in a board meeting perhaps, or just on the shop floor where you're having a debate about something, if it's not clear which way you should go, then one of the ways out of that indecision would be to refer to the vision.
Yeah.
What does that get us there? Is that a good thing for this North Star?
Absolutely.
Does that get us closer?
It starts to become, and that's where I think it moves away from that. Like I said earlier, it's not fluff. It's not something that's a once a year annual vision setting meeting that everybody,
Yes, you hear about strategy away days, but you don't often hear about a vision away day, do you? You don't come up with a new one every year. You're right.
But it's that if it becomes part of the DNA of the organisation, if it's really people really buy into it and engage with it, then it actually affects everything from the boardroom to the shop floor and the way that the company works.
True. And it's actually harmful to be tweaking it all the time and thinking about a different way of expressing it, because it takes years for these vision understandings to get well embedded in an organisation. Imagine people who've been recruited knowing that's what the vision is, and then it changes halfway through.
You start getting into culture, you start then... Which is a whole other podcast series, probably. But it's
and culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Absolutely, and that's when we're talking about vision. It's a leadership responsibility.
And I don't think you're putting it too seriously on that. You mentioned that the other day, and I think that is really important for leaders listening to this. That this is part of your job. Yeah, you may think your job is to go out and win the next bit of work and look after the team and manage the finances, but the most important bit is the leadership bit, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, if people, there's a proverb that I often quote that says, without a vision, the people perish. And it's leadership's role to provide that vision and to live in a way that's authentic, in line with that vision. It
gives life meaning, gives hope, all sorts of things.
All sorts of things. So it's really critical, I think, for people who are in that position to actually be clear about what their vision is and to live it out.
And talking about the leadership role, something that several of our clients will know I've quoted before, and it was quoted to me when I was very young, and Roy, if you're listening, you passed this on to me, is that a leader only really has two jobs: to create a vision and build a team. And if you can tick those two off as a leader, then the second of those two things means you don't have to do anything else in more detail. You've built the team, but you've got to tell them where they're going. So create a vision, build a team.
So how would that maybe build the team? How does that play out in just the day-to-day? How does a vision link into that building the team?
Well, it starts with recruitment, if you take the whole life cycle of how a team comes to be, and then the development and reviews and decisions that get taken within the business should all be referring back to it, even to the point where if somebody is actively working against the vision, they no longer belong on the bus, and they need to be found a berth somewhere else. So I think it forms over a longish period of time that those that buy into the vision, understand it and want to get there are the ones that you keep around you.
Just to be clear, because we've done a recruitment video recently.
We have.
Part of our vision does not necessarily involve dressing up in inflatable cowboy suits. Although, if anybody
but our vision is to have a little bit of fun, I suppose, isn't it? So, yeah.
Well, it's about authentic vulnerability. I'll leave it at that.
Very good, and you came across very well on that. I'm sure several people will by now have seen our very famous recruitment video. It's done its rounds on LinkedIn a number of times. If you haven't, go and check it out.
Exactly.
So what do we use it for then? What are the sort of two main areas, I suppose, that a vision is useful for from us, isn't it? There's a bit of in the now.
Yeah.
And there's about where we're going to. So we've talked a bit about the where we're going to, the North Star type stuff. But there's a bit of the in the now as well, which is around that team sort of thing.
Yeah, so around recruitment, like you just mentioned and we just talked about. So I guess we'll get onto this in a little bit about what makes up a vision, but partly it's your values, those sorts of things. So bringing that into your recruitment, having an understanding of that, and also knowing where you want to go as a business is quite an important thing to say to new recruits.
I think more so now, or at least this is what we're told, the generations going into the workplace now are much more aware than I certainly was when I went into the workplace, and I don't know about you, but they ask, what's the point of this company? Yeah. Why does it deserve to exist? Is this something I want to hitch my career up to for a few years or longer? They're asking very different questions than I would have done, which is,
much
can
more
I have a job?
Purpose-led, maybe.
Purpose-led, yeah, exactly.
Want to get some sense of, it's not just about financial reward, it's about bettering themselves, bettering the community, the planet, all those sorts of things are all mixed into it. Yeah, exactly. And I think it also then, if it links into recruitment, then it links into appraisals. Yeah. So how are you then measuring that kind of, the vision can be used as a way of measuring how well someone's aligning to organisational goals. Certainly
with the elements of the vision, which we'll come on to in a minute, with values and that sort of thing.
And I think ultimately as well, decision making.
Yeah.
You have to have a framework to make decisions in.
And asking that question, does this decision, going one way or the other, get us closer to achieving the vision or not? Yeah. And sometimes you realise actually it's quite trivial and we're spending too much time worrying about a decision that won't actually impact the vision at all. Yeah. It's a tactical thing, just make a decision and move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Left or right.
So that's the now preserving the core, if you like, of the business. But then there's that bit about stimulating progress to the place you want to get to.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that the vision isn't left in isolation. There's no point having a vision, put it on a sign on the wall. Almost one of my pet hates actually is a vision statement on the wall in a building. Yeah. If you've got to put it on the wall, then already you've lost, right? Because people should just know it should be woven through the fabric of the building. But it can't stand in isolation, however you communicate it. It's got to lead on to the strategy.
Yeah. And how then, so you can't really have a strategy without knowing where you're going, right? If you don't have a destination, how are you going to get there?
Yeah, I liken it to make sure the car's pointing in the right direction before you put your foot on the accelerator. Yeah. People who are very action-oriented love putting their foot on the accelerator, but it might be pointing the wrong way. So,
absolutely.
And what is the right way even? You never got a map.
And I think as well, a vision is a way of, you've got to have some way in the business of measuring accomplishment and measuring progress. And a vision can actually be that scale.
Well, you say you've got to have that, and we would certainly advocate that, but it's amazing how many businesses don't. They just measure their progress every year on, did we make any money? Or, what's our market share perhaps? But how many of them take the time and allow themselves to take the time, stand back and say, actually, on a 10-year time scale, are we getting where we wanted to get to? Are we getting better? Are we achieving slowly the thing that we set out to achieve? And lots of people have almost got stuck in a rut of coming to work every day, turning today into a different version of yesterday, but broadly the same, and opening their emails and getting on with it. Yeah. Answering the phone, doing the to-do list. It's quite difficult actually to, as a leader especially, stand back and give yourself permission to not do that email, answer that phone call, do that thing, but to think. Or even to get into a small group and think. There's almost a stigma attached to it where if directors are in a huddle somewhere, they feel guilty that, oh gosh, I'm not doing my job now. Well, actually you are. Talking about where you're going, what's going on around you, and what are the decisions we're going to take to navigate through that. That's the leader's job, right?
Is it the Eisenhower matrix? Urgent, important?
Yes.
That's one.
Yeah.
It's always, the important things always get
trumped by the urgent
for
things.
the urgent things.
Yeah. And I think we confer urgency as a label on things that aren't really urgent. That email that's just arrived, for some reason, always seems in your mind to be more deserving of your attention than the one that you left from yesterday because it was going to take a bit longer. Yeah. There's this instinct. I need to splat the rat, do the thing that's just happened. and you lose perspective a little bit. So take that onto an even larger scale. What about that chat we had a year ago, which said we were going to try and achieve this by a year's time? When have we ever reflected on that discussion again and made sure?
Well, I suppose we find as well that quite a few of these conversations end up happening in the pub, don't they, as well?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's your comfortable place, it may be on a walk or a bike ride, or it could be anyway, doing a yoga session. Inspiration comes in many forms in different places for different people, doesn't it?
I mean, we did try that a bit, didn't we?
Not the yoga
walking, not the walking meetings, and and actually, there's different ways of trying to carve out that time to really think about.
Well, that's triggered another thought, because this idea of having the away day, and I've talked about the fact that you don't have a vision away day every year, but you do have perhaps a strategy one, and you refer to the vision at the beginning, remind yourselves of it, and so on. And taking yourselves physically away from the space where you work every day has got quite a marked effect. I see it whenever we run workshops with teams, especially if we're familiar with working with them in board meetings, where they tend to be in familiar surroundings. Behaviour does change. You take away the comfort blanket of knowing how to get the next cup of tea, where the loos are, who sits where around the table, all those habits we fall into. Break that apart, go somewhere new, and don't keep going to the same place every time you do one of these things. Try and find something different. And our friend Archie does this on outdoor activity exercises, doesn't he? And gets his teams to go and do that to great effect.
And we've tried things like the Lego stuff as well, haven't we? To get a load of Lego, and you can get people that will come in and facilitate these sessions.
Dave Hall, great from the Creativity Centre. Yeah, he's a great facilitator of that sort of thing. And
just kind of play, that whole kind of play thing to come up with. Yeah. And again, it feels a little bit wrong that you should be doing these types of things. Yeah. You're supposed to be serious about business and all this, but there's been I remember one story about, I think it was Life Fest or something, that someone that worked for RNLI was playing with Lego and worked out that using the Lego, that why couldn't they find people, and it was because the waves were too high for the little head on the Lego thing, the map that he'd made, and they just worked out, well, maybe we could put something like a GPS in every Life Fest or something, and that was
comes up with new ideas.
Come up with new ideas just by playing with Lego, and it's amazing.
Well, there's another podcast there on creative thinking. We should get Dave in for that. Actually, he's very good just to talk about it. Yeah.
So bring it back to vision.
What
makes a good one?
Yeah, well, I always put number one on the list, it's got to be inspirational. Because even those other things on that list, which we'll come to, if people don't hear it and think, yes, great, brilliant, that's me, I want to be part of that, then no matter how well defined and remembered it is, it's a waste of time, isn't it?
Yeah.
If our vision is to stay right where we are, doing exactly what we do today, and no one's going to grow, you may remember that, but it's not particularly inspirational.
Yeah. It's got to motivate people, hasn't it?
It's got to motivate people.
In the right way.
Well, if you've got that North Star, you've got to want to get to it. Yeah. If you've chosen a North Star that people want to run away from, it's not going to be very helpful for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's got to be the sort of thing that people want to, I can't remember I'm going to share my ignorance of literature here. I think it's King Lear or something, where he stands shouting into the sea or something, and if someone says something to him, it's all well and good kind of shout. I'm paraphrasing it, obviously this isn't Shakespeare.
It doesn't sound very Shakespearean.
It's all well and good shouting, but when you shout, does anybody follow, type of thing? And it's that emphasis on, well, if you are putting something out there as a vision, is it the sort of thing that people actually want to engage with and come along with? Because otherwise, all you've got
You've got to be ready to follow. There's that relationship of leadership and followership. Yeah, that's very good.
So
it's got to be motivational, as you say, inspirational. It's got to be easy to understand and remember. Otherwise, it's not going to get any oxygen, is it? It's got to be used frequently enough so that you help people remember it.
And so that's it's got to lead into communication. How do you communicate the vision? Is it easy to communicate? Is the vision so complicated and convoluted that no one can understand it unless they've spent all year in the boardroom thinking about it?
And we see some absolute horrors. We saw one yesterday on screen, which was a sentence which explained, it was probably what they thought was a vision statement, but it didn't act as a vision. It was more of a slogan, I think. Yeah. And people sort of think, we need a vision statement, to be the best supplier of widgets in Western Christendom or whatever their region is. That's not really a vision, is it?
No.
It's more of a marketing strapline or whatever it may be. So there are some components which I think we should probably come on to now to break this down into a way of describing a vision so that it can be useful and more easily remembered, perhaps. And more desirable?
So there's different, I suppose there are, just say, obviously, different ways that you can start to look at a vision.
Lots of different models out there.
Different models.
Yeah, Google it and you'll have hundreds.
The one that we've kind of rested on, having looked at different ones, is the Collins-Porras.
Yep.
So it's Jim Collins and Jerry Porras, who did an awful lot of work in the 90s, looking at different companies, so good company, bad company.
It's a lot of
research
research-backed, yeah. Exactly.
Research-backed, what actually made successful companies successful.
Yeah.
And one of the key components that they found was a clear vision.
Yeah.
Was the
well, they wrote it up in that what is now famous Harvard Business Review article,
yeah.
HBR article, and you can still get it online. I managed to download the PDF of it the other day. It's not behind a gate, with the email address thing. You don't have to pay for it. And I know it's probably, you could think of it as being a bit dated now because we're coming up for 25, 26 years old. But it's as true now as it was then, like a vision should be, I suppose. So, and it's a reasonably good framework. Why should it go out of date?
Yeah, I read it recently, and yes, they're referring to Sony in the 60s or something or whatever.
Yeah,
but
the examples are going to change.
But it doesn't really matter, I don't think, because what they were trying to do is the same as what businesses today are trying to do.
Yeah,
it's just maybe the context has changed. And
so let's just summarise broadly what they were trying to do, and then we can go into a bit more depth. But on the whole, they tried to break down this very nebulous view of what a vision is into at least two key parts, didn't they? They wanted to make it easier to understand, and you see this depicted if you did an image search on the Collins-Porras model. You'll see that.
So you've got a core ideology and an envisioned future.
Yeah.
So
which speaks to what we said earlier about the purpose of having the vision anyway. Yeah. You want to be able to preserve the core of what you have now, which is that ideology bit, and that envisioned future is making sure that you're stimulating progress towards some nirvana, some other place that you've decided is better than where you are now.
And so the core ideology then, if we just maybe focus on that for a little bit, is made up of two components. So one of those is the values. Yeah.
And interestingly, when I do workshops and I ask people to start telling me what their current vision is, values are almost always what comes up first.
Yeah.
People list values. And it's great with the Collins-Porras model to be able to say, I've got a place to put those. They're really important. They're 1/4 of how we describe our vision. So let's pop those in there. But then people realise that just listing values isn't going to be the whole, but they have a place.
I think it's a point there that values are discovered. They're actually part of your organisational DNA.
Yes.
It's not something that's aspirational, as it were. You've got to be honest about what your values are.
Yes, if you try and treat that as the North Star, let's have a different value to today, then good luck with that. You're trying to change ingrained behaviours. You have a set of values as an organisation.
And because there is a place within the Collins-Porras model for that kind of aspirational future thinking bit. But the values bit is, and you should really not have, maybe like 3 to 5 values is where you're going to get your sweet spot. If you've got a list of 20 values, some of those aren't going to be core. Really what you want to nail down to is like, if this cost us money, we would still do this thing.
Yeah.
Because it's so ingrained in our psyche as an organisation.
It's got to be memorable again. You've got to use them in appraisals, in recruitment and so on. And with 20, you're never going to remember them. Plus the fact there's a chance they'll contradict one another if you're not careful.
I do remember once doing something on this where we wanted to come up with the values, and it was kind of bit like, okay, let's just, you can find a word, I can't remember what it was now, reach or something, and then you try and match the values into the acronym. So don't do that. That's not a good way.
That's going to lead you down the wrong road.
That's going to lead you down the wrong path.
Yeah.
So you've got your values as your core ideology, but then also purpose.
Now, we talked about purpose earlier on, didn't we? In the context of it's a bit more in vogue now. It's talked about a lot more. What is the purpose of your company? And it's probably fair to say 10 years ago, companies didn't really dwell too much on what their purpose was, unless they followed the Collins-Porras model from the 90s, of course. They were more worried about vision in terms of just, let's put a number on it. Let's just say how big are we going to be and have done with it, or which markets are we going to be in. But I think recruits these days have got every right to ask what is the purpose. And leaders of a company have got every duty to answer that question. Why are we here? Yeah. If we're just another taxi company in town or another hairdressers, do we deserve to exist? Because someone else could come in and do this. What are we adding to the sum of human achievement or knowledge by just doing the same as everybody else? Let's set our stall out to do it differently in a better way.
And do we think that is harder for maybe SMEs, maybe particularly.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. And every SME I've gone into really struggle with this part. And because especially when you quote examples to try and get the creative juices going, they're all big company ones. And they're going to be because that's companies that people recognize. But, with Nike, their purpose, if you like, is to make everybody an athlete with the whole just do it mantra. That's great for them. SpaceX wants to make humans a multiplanetary species. That's pretty big stuff. Google wants to democratize information. Microsoft wants to make everybody access all the tools they need to do their work. eBay wants to make everybody a seller. And these are all great lofty goals, and you can buy into that. If you're a cause-based organization like Greenpeace or a political party, you can buy into that purpose very easily. As soon as you shrink that down to, the lawyer around the corner or the machine shop down the road or whatever your business is, it's easy to fall into the trap that that's not for us. That's what big companies do. We're just a little thing getting on with our own. Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. You can still set out to do it differently, better, more inspiring.
Yeah, I suppose at base level, you could say our purpose is to provide employment for the local community. I mean, that is
what drives you. Some people don't believe that even. They just regard employment as a resource to get the job done. But some very strongly driven by that. And we've got a client, haven't we, that came up in a strategy session and said, actually, we are a Midlands-based manufacturer. We know we could outsource all of our manufacturing to either Eastern Europe or Far East, but that's not what we're about. We've very much got roots in the Midlands, and we want to have a business here that employs the skills that we've developed over many decades.
Yeah. So that's the
purpose. So that's the two components then of the core ideology. You've got the values bit, which often comes up first, and then the purpose bit. So that's the first half. So what's the second half?
So the second half is more about the envisioned.
Easy for you to say.
It's very hard with the cold to say that. The envisioned future. So that's made up of two parts. So you've got BHAG. So big, hairy, audacious goal.
A less polite acronym for those
polite company.
Looking up.
And then the vivid description.
Yeah.
So the BHAG is like a goal that it should be a stretch. It should be a 10 to 20 year kind of
it's
ambition.
Not the same as your 5-year goal or this next year's budget, is it? Yeah. It's got to be something that's just over the horizon, really.
Yeah, almost like not quite shoot for the moon. You might hit the ceiling, but it's got to be something that's going to push you beyond your current capabilities.
It's more achievable than the overarching vision, which could be a North Star that could be up in the sky, but it's the biggest mountain you can see on the way there.
Yeah.
So it's still something you need to plan for over 10 years or more. Yeah. So that's your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal, and often that's described with numbers. That's probably the one area that tends to have numbers in it more than the other ones, or you do get it in some other areas.
And then the vivid description is the way that you would kind of paint the picture with words of what that future state looks like. So in 20 years' time, and this is the bit that I think is great when I say to people is, if you were in the pub talking to someone or you're talking to your friends about what this is going to look like, how do you describe it? It can also be useful to try and link it in to say, well, we want our customer service to be like John Lewis or something, or pick an example of someone we want to be as innovative as Apple or something, or
give it a label, use metaphors. And for me, this is where all of the three previous sections really come together, because you're using your storytelling skills to actually paint a verbal picture. And I have tried with artists trying to actually come up with a physical picture. Don't go there. It's flipping difficult. But verbal pictures do the job. Come up with those metaphors, those explanations, and bring it all together. And usually they're sufficiently different from where you are today, if you were to then ask people to describe the as is versus the to be. That gap between the two is the ideal launching point to the next step in the process, which is the strategy. How do we get from where we are to this now vivid description of where we want to be, which embodies the BHAG, the purpose, and the values on the way? And
I think that's where you can put that aspirational. So like when we talked about values and we talked about, maybe sometimes you get aspirational values that aren't actually reflective of what's in the business. That's where the vivid description is where those things can be parked. So, to take innovation, because that's kind of an overused word, but that could be something that maybe is not part of your organization at the moment, but that's where you want to move to. And okay, so in the future, the next 20 years, we want to be more innovative or the most innovative in our market. okay, well, that envisioned future then starts to talk about, well, how are we going to recruit people? How are we going to change the culture? How are we going to set
encourage
ourselves
innovation, risk-taking, analysis,
all of those.
and so on. Yeah.
And I have even in some cases put KPIs against every sentence in that vivid description. So, for example, we don't want to ever have to use we don't want to have to ever use a recruitment agency to get candidates.
Because we've got a queue at the door.
At the door. Well, you can measure that quite easily. Yeah. Exactly. You can measure some of these other things that, employee engagement or whatever it is that we're doing. So that's, you can use that vivid description as a way
it's more actionable. People can relate to that. And that's, as I say, where it's a great launch point into the strategy bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So that's a bit of a tour de force, really, of one of the models, the one that we use more of. We use it in loads of clients, often repeated every year, not to rehash the vision, but to remind people of it, and then to use that for the strategy session, which is great. Probably worth just closing out on a little reflection in case people are asking about, so what are yours then? Has Wellmeadow done this on itself? Well, of course we have.
Yep.
Yeah. Should we quickly run through what the 4 things, broadly speaking, look like for us?
Yeah. So we've got 4 values.
Very well defined. They're on our website. We use them in our recruitment, in our appraisals. Yeah.
In our appraisals.
Have we got any purpose?
We've got purpose. Questionable. Yes, we do. Our purpose is really to build things of lasting value.
And it's interesting. We came up with that when we first formed the company 13 years ago, and it probably existed before that in our previous company as well. And it's quite deep-seated, I think. We've referred to it. It's stood the test of time.
Yeah.
We've referred to that over and over again, and it is what keeps pulling us back to why do we do what we do. We're not transactional.
It's something that is applicable to shareholders. It's applicable to employees. It's applicable to clients. Wherever we go, we want to build things that last. It's so it's it's
not a here today, gone tomorrow quick fix. It's something that really is worth putting some effort into because it's going to be around for a long time. So that's our purpose. BHAG, I think it's fair to say we've got a fairly clearly defined in our heads anyway what the BHAG is, and the slices of that get taken off into our targets for each year. But we've got a pretty audacious set of goals for our business that we write down. And then the vivid description, I think we talk about this probably the most out of all of the bits.
Yeah, and I think probably part of that is we've invested in the whole office infrastructure that we've got as a way of, kind of trying to make it a better place to work and encourage people to be more creative. So you may have seen some of our things on our office refit that we did. And
true.
That was part of the vivid description of...
It's very vivid. You can bring it to life very visually, can't you? The office environment. But even how we structure our business, how we win work, how we're going to recruit in the future, what the size of the team will be. We've described that fairly lucidly, vividly, if you like. I think that is therefore being very useful for us as it drives us forward. We know instinctively, I think, whether something is the right thing to do.
The annual ski trip.
The annual ski trip. That's been on that description for a few years. We're getting there.
Getting there.
Note to recruits, if you like skiing, this is the place to come. Good. Well, there we go. I thought it was important to finish off that sort of description of the tool in very generic terms with something a bit more practical. Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. It's one of our longer ones today. We could probably have gone on for another half an hour on that. So you've been listening to the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Please subscribe, like, share our podcast from wherever you get your podcasts, and tell your business friends that we're here and that we're worth a listen. And until next time, cheerio. Good luck with your business.